welcome to That's
That's
High
high praise.
Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast.
I'm your co-host VH Zest.
I'm your other co-host, Captain Nostalgia.
So, Josh, I made this comment to you yesterday. We've basically not talked about this movie at all. This is just kind of what we do. Is we see a movie and then we just kind of bide our time until the podcast, and then we just kind of get everything out, as raw as we can. Um, but the one thing that we said was, or I said at least, was I feel like this is the movie that like this podcast and this movie, like this is the movie for this podcast. I don't remember how I said it, but it's like this is the most that's high praise movie. If you knew Josh and I, like that we have ever had the pleasure of covering.
Yeah, I 100% agree because it has the horror for me. It has like the blood and guts for me, but it has like the comedy and like
Yeah,
lots of ska jokes and references for you. So
my heart. Yeah, yeah, and
100%.
it's just got like yeah, it's funny, it's kooky, it's horror but not scary per se. It's obviously based off of like a 140-year-old novel. That's kind of fun in its own way. It's Nicolas Cage. Like this movie is amazing.
We're of course talking about Renfield because I realized had not introduced it yet, but
That's fine.
this is also kind of a unique podcast to do because this is the first time that Micah and I have not podcasted together and been in the same room for this show.
Yeah,
So we now live in different states. So
we do.
life has been kind of crazy, but we are back to being our monthly selves.
We're back. Yeah,
I think all we needed was some human blood, and here we go. We just
that's right.
restored
That's right.
everything back. So let's jump into this, man, because I have been waiting so long to talk about this movie.
Yeah.
I feel like when I did my spoiler for your review, I was like, I have been waiting literally, not just podcasting, but I've been waiting to talk about this movie for, I feel like a year and a half at this point. Because when they announced
I
it, I
was
was
gonna
like,
say, yeah, we found out about like, oh, Nicolas Cage is gonna be Dracula, probably 2021.
yeah,
Easy.
it is like you could not pick like a better casting choice for this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, which is weird because I'm sure there are plenty of people who could argue that. And if you asked me, 2, 3 years ago, hey, who would you want to play Dracula? I don't even know if I would have said Nicolas Cage. But like, my God. I feel like I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, like, I feel like this is the movie he's always wanted to do.
So trivia fact. This has been a lifelong dream of his. In fact, while he was promoting Season of the Witch, which we've yet to cover from 2011, they
Oh,
said that his love for Christopher Lee is the reason he makes horror movies and that he is considered Lee to be one of the best actors uh to portray the iconic Dracula.
nice, nice. That's not a bad take. I've seen Christopher Lee as Dracula. Um, Yeah, yeah. It just I know that like Nicolas Cage, like that what's that movie like the Caligari movie that like German impressionist horror film that he loves.
The Island of Dr.
That
Caligari.
Island of Dr. Caligari, like he has gone on about that literally in Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. I know that like I think he did a Wired interview a couple years ago where they asked him about some of his more iconic roles, and they got to Moonstruck, and he said that like a lot of what he was trying to do was base like part of his mannerisms and role off of the very, very first. I don't. It was either Wolfman or like one of the earlier iterations of Beauty and the Beast. May have been Beauty and the Beast.
Interesting.
And yeah, it was really weird. Yeah. So it's just been very well known if you're a Cage fan for some time that he loves just really really old horror cinema, and this movie like goes for that. Like a lot of the cinematography in the beginning as they're kind of building up the story and the plot, like they go back to that styling of those weird like candlelit black and white um built set sort of horror movies back in like the Abbott and Costello days and prior. Um and it just looks beautiful.
Yeah, it's really the more technical aspects of this is really interesting because it feels like it spans like multiple decades, like
Hmm.
where you
And
have
should.
that uh like 1930s Universal monster feel to it when we kind of get the introduction to him and Holt's character. But then also at the same time you have that like the way that the some of the action sequences are filmed, like it feels very much like a throwback to the 80s where it's like everything is like heightened when it's camp.
Yeah.
The blood is just kind of like
Oh, it's everywhere.
over
Yeah,
exaggerated. It's so good.
it is.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I felt like that really helped kind of push a lot of the humor for it, but also at
Yeah.
the same time, like some of the cinematography, especially like in those uh, those that like support group scenes looked very this movie had like a very specific feel to it where that sequence felt very green, which felt very reminiscent of like early 2000s. And then you had like that very
Yeah.
modern feel where you had the blues and the reds where they would be in I don't remember like the name of like the bar um that he would like go and eat at where him and Aquafina meet, but a
Hmm.
lot of that stuff felt like very modern. And then of course like you had like Nicholas Holt's apartment that is very it's very bright, it's very pastel. Like so
Pastel. Yeah.
I think this is really interesting because like again, this movie just is a lot of fun. It spans like differences in genre, but also at the same
Mhm.
time, by doing the genres like blend really well, it also blends a lot of its looks and its feels.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. But nevertheless, like they maintain cohesion very, very well. Like the movie is very self-aware. I mean, anything with kind of like a monologue, um, is going to be, I guess, like what you would call a first-person monologue
Mhm.
is going to be kind of self-aware. But then you have moments where, uh, like there Renfield is in like a therapy session of sorts and he's talking about Dracula and he's like he'll be at full power and his therapist kind of guy is like why would you phrase it like that, be at full power, and it's just like
Yeah.
the movie is so, in a way it's very, very self-aware, and while we're on the topic of like cinematography, color and things like that, like there's two things I want to kind of address, and one is just on kind of on the topic of Cage's career, like it's been beautiful and interesting to see a lot of these more like horror, related movies have that sort of like color palette, the same color palette. Like it's that whole like 80s neon vibrant, weird sort of, Willy's Wonderland had it. I assume Color Out of Space had it, although I've not seen that movie yet. Um, Prisoners of Ghostland kind of had it. Mandy had it in spades. This movie has it. It's just very interesting that like Nicolas Cage, his movies themselves are almost kind of becoming like you can almost tell it's a Nicolas Cage movie before he's in it. They have this sort of fingerprint that I find very interesting. And whether that's intentional or not, Lord knows, But it's something I feel like I've noticed. And then the other thing I thought that was really random, but really a cool set choice with this movie is there's at least three different sets, like scenes, that they return to that have like wall collages.
Mhm.
I don't know how intentional that was, but like the police station had all these like pictures and like records on the wall, and they're just literally on the wall. Renfield's apartment had all of these overlapping um, kind of encouragement posters on the wall. I forget what those are called. And then if you go, you go into the hospital where they're kind of hiding out, Renfield or Dracula's hiding out, and there's all of these, um, it's the bags that they put like they draw blood into, or it's like the kind of bag that you might see fluid go into, when somebody's hooked up to like an
Like an
IV.
IV pouch,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's all of those just like just beautifully arranged on a wall. And anyway, like all we're talking about sets, we haven't really got into the story yet at all, but like just the cohesion that is maintained despite the fact that like this is a multi-genre movie with different sorts of colors and feels added. It's awesome.
I'm curious, like correct me if I'm wrong. Is this the first like multi-genre movie we've covered on this podcast?
Um, I guess what that might depend on what you mean by multi-genre, I guess.
Because this to me,
Um,
it blends in the genres of action, horror, and
or
comedy.
comedy. Yeah, for sure. And it was billed as a horror comedy. Um, yeah, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think. Like, I don't know. I don't know. Um, I just don't. I'm not sure.
I mean, it's also it's anyways. Let's just jump into like general thoughts on this movie. I mean, like I think we've
Sure.
teased them, but like I'm curious to hear your general thoughts on this because we haven't talked about it, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think like this movie. I mean, I love the movie, right? Like I just loved it. If you haven't gotten that from us just talking about it, like I really loved the movie. I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was fascinating to like, hey, we're gonna take this very old Irish, horror character, um, and and a lesser known character from that book because I don't remember ever seeing a Dracula movie that talks about Renfield. I probably could watch more Dracula movies, but um, you could have heard about Dracula your whole life and not know who Renfield is. You probably would even know who Van Helsing was and still not know who Renfield was. Um, so to take a character like that and then build the story around it, I thought was really fun and really cool. I've really love like I love a good B-lister. I love a good side character. And so the movie from being from the perspective of that side character, I thought was really, really cool because it made it a lot more relatable, honestly. Nobody's going to relate to a blood-sucking monster who can live forever and et cetera, or very few people anyway, I suppose. It's Renfield is more relatable. Um, and I think like, yeah, I don't know. I would love to see more of these kinds of things. They did a Victor Frankenstein movie with shoot, what's his name?
Daniel
Um,
Radcliffe
Daniel
and
Radcliffe
James
and
McAvoy.
James McAvoy. And it was very similar deal where it was like, hey, we're going to talk about Frankenstein. And Igor's not in the book. Just let's get that out there. Igor's not in the book. I actually have read Frankenstein. I loved it, but Igor's not there. But we're going to tell the Frankenstein story from the perspective of Igor. Beautiful movie. Like awesome. I think it kind of went under the radar, but like I teared up. I love that movie. And I think that it's the same idea of like not all of us are crazy intelligent mad scientists, but all of us have had to like work for somebody, you know? And that's absolutely brilliant to tell a fantasy story from a perspective that we can all understand.
Yeah, I really loved it. I think, and I'm finding as a horror fan too, the movies that resonate with me the most are the ones that hit me on a deeper emotional level or challenge me emotionally. And
Mhm.
like, I would say that like I came out of a overall like depending on like who I worked for because I went through several bosses at my last job, but there were definitely times where I would definitely say it was like 50-50 of like having toxicity as a boss. Like I want to expand upon that later in the mental health, but
Sure.
section. But I think you're right, man. Like it's really fascinating to kind of take like a side character and like span their story and kind of tell this story from multi decades, right? And maybe even a century. Uh
Yeah.
because like that's just such a fascinating thing to me. Like how does something like that affect a person? And I think the
Yeah.
performances across the board are absolutely brilliant. I love the chemistry between Nicholas-Hoult and Aquafina. Wasn't really sure how it was gonna work, but like I loved that like even he had like an emotional pull. I think the story for the most part is like really works itself out. I think my
Hmm.
biggest problem with it is maybe like the first like 20 to 25 minutes of this movie where it just seemed like they threw a lot at you
It did, yeah.
and then it kind of fleshed itself out by the end. But
Mhm.
like that initial and again, I've only seen this once, so it's like
Same.
just experiencing it like that one time, like uh it felt like really intense to kind of have this
Yeah.
opening.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. Um, yeah, it was all at once, but it was also like I think in a way they were just trying to. It was funny. The intro, if we can call it that, the intro of the movie was funny. Kind of this providing the backstory and stuff of how Renfield became uh in under the service of Dracula and stuff like that, and kind of how they've come to modern times, what's brought them this far, and things like that. I think it was really well done, but yeah, it was a lot all at once. That was something. If I can offer a definite criticism of the movie, it's very similar. It's that beginning piece because um so Renfield goes and tries to take these guys captive and kill them to bring Dracula food, and then there's this mob guy who's like there, and then he goes and like
Teddy Lobo.
drives away. What?
Teddy Lobo.
Yeah, Teddy Lobo. Yeah, that got me thinking about something else. But anyway, um, but he goes and like gets stopped at like a cop like checkpoint, and he gets taken into jail and stuff like that. And then they start to spend reoccurring scenes on Aquafina's character, this police officer, and and the Lobo character, the henchman, the mob boss guy. And it was probably it was probably well into the first act, maybe even into the second act, before I was really able to accept, okay, this is just part of the story now. Because there was not really any connective tissue in the very first part of the movie between Renfield and this cop and my boss. It was just like he went to go kill these people for Dracula, and all of a sudden that started to matter through more implications. Yeah, that became like it didn't feel super cohesive until later on you kind of just had to like accept, well, okay, this is kind of where we are, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the Teddy Lobo character at first kind of I didn't really know how to take him because it just kind of seemed like he just happened to be at a drug bust gone wrong and he
Right,
was just trying
right.
to watch the guy that he hired to, so context, like Teddy Lobo is a drug dealer. His drugs get stolen. He hires a hitman to kill the guys that stole the drugs. And so he's outside waiting, and like you think that he's just gonna be kind of like a throwaway scene and a
Yeah,
throwaway character. And I mean, ultimately, like by the end of the movie, he feels like a throwaway character because there's no real growth for him. Uh,
yeah,
But like, yeah, it was something that I feel like I had to just kind of swallow and accept. But
right.
like I also felt like it's not too far after like meeting her character. Like Aquafina really seems to be like developed really well and really quickly. Like you get a
Yeah,
backstory for her like almost within like the second or third scene you see of her.
yeah, that's very true. Like she comes on the scene and you understand her within 10 to 15 minutes. Whereas Ben Schwartz's character, the Lobo character, like they're basically like halfway through the movie spelling it out for you why this like mob family matters. Um and yeah, and so that was interesting. I think the payoff is good. I think all in all, like it ends very, very well. But you have to kind of accept at a certain point that like I guess there's just two bad guys in this movie. And I felt personally like there were times where I was waiting for Dracula to not be the bad guy, or I was waiting for something. I wasn't sure, I wasn't sure if the Dracula character was going to change or develop, or if the story was just going to develop around him and he wasn't going to change or develop. Um, and that was in a large way that was okay with me because I loved the character. But nevertheless, you just kind of have to accept eventually that like I guess there's two bad guys and and Renfield is kind of caught in the crossfire, which is fine. It's not an unheard of thing, but like I said, the connective tissue early on is iffy.
Well, let's jump into spoilers right now.
Totally.
Because like just on this, so if you guys haven't seen, look, if you guys have not seen Renfield, we're gonna spoil it for you. But keeping on, this is your official warning. So pause, come back, download, make sure you guys subscribe. But keeping on the topic of Teddy, like the entire like Lobo like family, like empire, if it was made to just be that one scene in the very beginning, and you took them out, like the majority of this movie would still be the same. Like they are definitely the weakest link. Like I think the finale of this movie would be completely different where you know, Dracula and Lobo like they start working together and you have this big climax that ultimately ends up with the discovery that cocaine can be used as a protection spell.
Yeah. 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 Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if I agree that like they end up being, I guess, in a manner of speaking, tertiary, but they definitely feel tertiary early on. And you know, you get the idea that like Teddy Lobo thinks he's big stuff, and by the end of the movie, he keeps putting himself in the position of henchman despite wanting to be more, and he's just not. Um, and that's fine. He's not really a mob boss. His mother is the mob boss, and he is just kind of a right hand goon. Um, yeah. Uh, so I think something that we really need to talk about. It kind of gets into spoilers a little bit, but it also kind of sets up things throughout the movie. Is these therapy sessions that actually start the very beginning of the movie.
Yeah, I think that's a great place because and like just to, to go back to what I was originally saying because it ties into the therapy portions. I think that the idea of uh the Renfield character essentially coming to grips with the fact that he has had a toxic boss for, you know, probably we can imagine 90 years at this
Hmm.
point because that's about how old the Bela-Lugosi movies are, and that's I think that's kind of what the spin is here. Uh, so you can only imagine that it's been at least 90 to 100 years he's been working for this guy. Honestly, I think that this there's enough story there that you can like de unpack and like absolutely tell, and then like Aquafina is kind of like a love interest, which is originally what I thought it was gonna be, but I think these therapy sessions, uh, these group therapy or like support things are just absolutely fascinating because they from a from a writing standpoint they bring in some really interesting aspects to Renfield's like character development
Hmm.
that I just thought was really great. It had one of the best running jokes throughout the entire line where you had that girl Carol who like every time we would go back to a scene she was always talking and Renfield had to like come in and burst her out and like so the running joke for her was always like no one cares about Carol and
Yeah.
I always liked that and like I thought that like Mark was a great character both like we mentioned the scenes with like him you know why would you phrase it like that people
Yeah.
into full power and then like the ending once he comes back from the dead and he's kind of like revamped the support group he's like you know thanks for bringing us back from the dead you know you just with the things that you know we can't unsee and the things we can't unhear and like he's just kind of showing that like he was like really traumatized by death and it was one of the best
Yeah.
jokes in the entire movie. If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I loved it. I loved kind of the irony of those scenes of where like Renfield's whole thing was like, oh, well, these people are in bad relationships. I'm gonna go take their exes. I'm gonna kill them. I'm gonna bring them to Dracula, and he's gonna continue to eat and live because that's his whole role. Um, is he's Dracula's familiar. He gets some powers because of that, and you know, that's that. Um, but I love that. I thought it provided kind of like a backbone and like a place to return. Yeah, when it came to jokes, but also just a really great place for context of story and context of like theme as well, because Renfield realizes that like although he's not speaking in these sessions, he realizes that like he does have a a textbook narcissistic boss. He is in a toxic relationship and has been for a long time. His place in the therapy community does matter. He does need this, because although he is just Dracula's familiar, and although he did buy into that very early on, um, he is still a person, and he's kind of realizing kind of what it means to be a person. Like it's a weird way to tell a coming of age story, but it almost feels like a coming of age story because this guy is like taking back the life that he has willingly given away.
Yeah, and I like, to get kind of serious for a second. Like I like the
Yeah.
way that they portray the framing of the support group sequences, is because I think traditionally when you hear the term toxic relationship, we go to
Romance.
partners,
Yeah.
romance, spousal abuse, things like that.
Yeah.
And I think if there's anything that like I've discovered is that especially coming from like food as a background and job,
Yeah.
toxicity in relationships comes in multifaceted ways. And
Yeah.
I think that having a protagonist that literally works for Dracula was such a fascinating way to tell that story and bring awareness to that, and kind of like bring a deconstruction that is that there are multiple toxic sources from different people that can like affect your mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's very true. And like I was saying, like this I love that it's this horror fantasy story told from the perspective of maybe the one character that we can all sympathize with and empathize with, that like, shoot, I know what it's like to like willingly put myself into a position that is not good for me.
Mhm.
Or, even if I did it willingly, not knowing what it was, or I did it willingly knowing what it was, regardless. Yeah, and I love that like uh you have that kind of um yeah, they really like uh they really play on that really well, because while not all of us are have bosses, have fathers or mothers or significant others that are legitimate monsters, right? Um, it nevertheless has a profound effect on your worldview, like that kind of thing would,
Yeah,
you know?
what I think is fascinating too about having Dracula as a literal monster is that when
He sucks the life out of you.
when we first meet him, his character design is the classic Dracula that we know from films of the Lugosi and the Christopher Lee era. But
Yeah,
when you meet him in modern day, he is literally a monster. I
yeah,
mean, he literally has like sores and like his ears look like they're getting ready to fall off, and he just looks like grotesque almost to the climax of the movie where he has the meeting with uh the Lobo the Lobo mother. And I think that's such
the
a
Lobo mother.
yeah, I think it's such a it's like a direct, like very blatant meta thing that this movie does really well.
Yeah, 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 I agree. Like, so just for context in this, Dracula's character is like, uh, in the beginning of the movie, they explain how like he got exposed to sunlight, so he was very, 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 very damaged, despite not being killed. And so basically, Renfield has been nursing him back to health for quite some time. And so the first few scenes that you see him, he's like really grotesque and like Josh was saying, he's like falling apart and stuff. And it's like kind of funny in a way too, because like I think because it's Nicolas Cage, to some extent. But that being said, like Nicolas Cage does an incredible job. But yeah, like they portray it. It's like they give a face to how you might feel about a person.
Yeah,
That like this person is disparaged, they're lost, they're crippled, they're unwell, but nevertheless, you feel like you can't escape them and like they are more powerful than you are.
that's the interesting thing about Stockholm syndrome. I think
Right.
is that you feel like stuck. And I think
Yeah.
it's kind of that when you go through a toxic relationship, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, or even like sexual abuse, that like an element of that relationship is you feel stuck because the abuser has convinced you that you're stuck.
Right.
Like growing up, my mother was very open and about with my sister and I about the fact that like she had been sexually assaulted as a child, and
Sure.
like how my biological grandfather would like consistently tell her like, if you can't tell anybody that I'm doing this because, if you tell, then, so on and so forth. Giving the classic like narcissist and abuser language that you hear in television and read in books all the time. And um,
Yeah.
my mom, it wasn't until she was like 20 that my grandmother like randomly found out, and like my mom just unloaded like 15 years of abuse.
Yeah.
And like, now she's very open and she's very honest about, what she's gone through. But like having seen that, and also at the same time, like having worked with people that are like that, like been friends with people that are like that, like I think this movie does a really good job at addressing it and taking this really fantastical idea and grounding it in yourself, because the catchphrase of this movie is "I am enough." Like the
Yeah.
very fact that like that's part of the climax, I thought was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've known people to like get out of relationships with, you know, narcissists, for lack of a better term. And I'm like I've had those similar experiences myself, although not in like romantic entanglements. Um, and that's kind of the constant theme is like you feel like even after you get out of that, even if after you get out of from underneath that person's wing under their spell, whatever you want to call it, like you struggle so much with being like, I wonder if I deserve to be treated that way. I wonder if I'm really only as good as they said I was. I wonder if like, I will ever find somebody who is real and genuine. Do I deserve somebody who's real and genuine, who's not going to be like that, who does put, my best interests at heart and um, things like that. Um, and I think it was really, really cool and really simple without being like preachy, despite the fact that they were in a church, and without being like um too, I guess, mental healthy. I don't know how else to like say that.
Like yeah,
But
like almost like preaching like on like the importance of like mental health because like
yeah,
it, the way that this movie handles mental health is fascinating to like have that in one corner, but Aquafina's character in the other one to where like he is like driven by vengeance throughout the
yeah,
entire film. And, in the end, like her character journey is like trying to find peace with everything that her has happened to her father and kind of the corruption of this police force, which I gotta say, like I thought was really fascinating to kind of see that. And like she had some of the best like dramatic beats in this movie. And if you've never seen it, I highly recommend this movie. It's called The Farewell, and Aquafina is an actress that's known primarily for her um like comedic roles, obviously, like
mhm,
uh Nora Takes Queens. I think that's what it's called. Uh Crazy Rich Asians, like Nora is from Queens, sorry. Legend Shang-Chi Legends of the Ten Rings, like Ray
yeah,
Raya and the Last Dragon, like she's built a career out of it, but The Farewell is like an example of like the dramatic like range that she has like as an actress, not just as a
yeah,
comedian, but as an actress. And I think that this
yeah.
movie really I always love it when movies like this will like lean into her. Like, yes, she has some great jokes in this movie, but
She does. Yeah,
it's those dramatic scenes between like her and her sister, like her and Renfield connecting that I just really liked. And I think it's because you're welcoming this really tough character journey of like bitterness and like
yeah,
unforgiveness and hatred and
yeah,
rage.
yeah, yeah. It's also like it's interesting. I think there's kind of a juxtaposition too of like Renfield having this sort of like I don't want to call Dracula a father figure, but he is. They use the term boss, and he has this horrible, codependent kind of relationship with his boss, who's very abusive and manipulative and things like that. And then you have like the Aquafina's character, and she very much is like she loved her dad. Her dad was taken away from her, and now she's trying to like be as good as, if not better than her dad was, and it's this kind of like weird, cool interplay of like characters who like um kind of genuinely have something to offer one another in their journeys of like one is trying to figure out how to be better, the other one because they had a good experience that ended badly, and then the other one is trying to figure out how to be better because they've had a bad experience and they're trying to end it well. um and yeah, yeah,
I didn't even really kind of consider that when you frame it that way. Like it kind of like really deepens their relationship. It gives it a little bit more depth than they just randomly happen to meet at a bar. And I also have to say that like in terms of like how this movie handles comedy, I love that particular scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie where for
with the bus full of
context,
cheaters.
yeah, they like Dracula's giving Renfield like what he wants in terms of like what he deems is like good blood. And
Yeah, because it has to be innocent blood apparently,
yeah, so he's like he says like nuns, a bus full of cheerleaders,
and a couple in love.
and a couple of love. And he goes to this restaurant, which is a horror themed restaurant, and happens to literally see all of the things that are going on.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was so funny. Again, the movie like Um, the movie is extremely self-aware without breaking the fourth wall. Beautifully written and handled, in that regard. So, Josh, there's something that we have to talk about that we haven't so strictly and exclusively talked about that we always talk about in our episodes, and that is the titular character of this podcast,
Nicolas
um,
Cage.
Nicolas Cage. How do you feel about Cage's? I mean, I know how you feel, probably. I'm sure that you feel positive, but elaborate on your feelings of his performance in this film, if you would.
I think he creates this really unique Dracula to where it's something that feels classic, but something that feels modern. So there are mannerisms of him that I am a huge Bela-Lugosi fan. I
Sure.
love Lugosi's
And as is
Dracula,
Nicolas Cage.
and he definitely taps into that Lugosi charm. I think the sequences, not just where we kind of see him pay homage in the black and white in the beginning of the movie, but the sequence where he meets the Bella Francesca Lobo, the mob queen. I think he does it there, and like even when he meets Rebecca, I think he really lays on that charm really deep, and but I think there's enough about him that he lays on a lot of his own like signature mannerisms. Like when he finds out that Renfield gets an apartment, that's a classic like Nick Cage kind of freak out. And but also at the same time, like I just love the way that he handles himself throughout this course of this movie. I love when he invades the that monologue that he gives when he is in the where's he in the support group, and he's going down like all of the names that people have given him for Dracula, and he finally gets to, but you can call me simple Dracula. And
Yeah.
I love the way that he handles it, and I just thought that uh this type of Dracula is exactly what this movie needed. And had it been anyone else in this role, like I just don't think it would work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, gosh. I think you're right. Like there are moments where it's like, wow, this is Nicholas frickin' Cage. Where he like yells like Hail Satan or whatever it was, like toward the end. Which was just like stupid over the top and unnecessary. In moments when he like yeah, like the apartment scene where he's like, God, all right, I have to talk about this because it was so funny. Um, but like Renfield comes home and Nicolas Cage, Dracula, is just sitting in his like, powder colored like uh blocky kind of pastel apartment, and which is just really funny. And Renfield's like he stops and he frowns and he opens the door and looks down, and the mat at his door says, "Welcome, come on in." And it's my favorite joke in the movie because there's the trope that like a vampire can't come in unless you invite them. Um,
Mhm.
and I just thought that was so funny. But you have like scenes like that where it's like I think because the situation is him in a room he doesn't belong in, it feels a little bit more like an over the top Nicolas Cage style sort of acting. Um, and it fits the scene. It is really good. But there are other parts of the movie where like it's really dark and foreboding and stuff. And like my one of my bigger concerns wasn't that much of a concern in a way because I love Nicolas Cage, but like um, I know a lot of people's frustration with Nicolas Cage is that they can't watch a Cage movie and not see him in whatever role he's playing. That's like the biggest criticism I hear about Nicolas Cage is that nobody can take a movie seriously with him in it because it's just Nicolas Cage, allegedly. I disagree with that, although I think he has mannerisms that he carries from character to character at times. Um, but I nevertheless had that concern in this movie where I was like, this is Dracula. This is like a massive, massive character being played by Nicolas Cage, who is known for kind of having isms, mannerisms and things like that. And my concern was that I wouldn't be able to watch the movie and see Dracula for Nicolas Cage. Um, but you really like he does such a good job that like you forget whose face you're seeing. He just really, really owns the character very, very well. And I think Josh is right. Like, he really rides the line between the Bela Lugosi era and and a modern horror sort of take. I think that like a lot of those old horror movies, like they might have been scary for their time, but now you look at them and they're almost sort of like a lot of those characters are very clean cut and just so, and like it's just not scary at all, but it's spooky and creepy in its own right. But Nicolas Cage like and you don't see that in horror, but Nicolas Cage like brings that back to horror. And it's really great. It's really great. I mentioned I meant to mention this earlier, Josh. Like uh I wonder, something you said prompted me to think, like, I do wonder, given that this is a Universal film, um, I wonder two things, but I'll only state one of them right now. But I wonder if this is supposed to be Lugosi's Dracula.
See, I thought that too, especially the fact that like they almost kind of like recreate one
Hmm.
of the Lugosi scenes in this movie, and I I genuinely took it as it's Lugosi's Dracula. Like this is kind of what happens like after the film
Hmm.
ends, and you know, even the mannerisms of how everything is. And one of the things too is that like, you know, uh, we I think, you know, almost 50 episodes at this point, like we've established that like Cage has a lot of range. And
Hmm.
I loved kind of the practical effects look the first two times we get him, where he's kind of like very just like monstery. It's
Yeah,
incredible. But like the
yeah,
fact that like Nicolas Cage is like unrecognizable, but like still gives it his all. Like
yeah,
it's not like he's like dialing in the performance, like it's still fantastic.
yeah. It really is. It really like he knocks it out of the park. I really get the vibe that like he loved doing this character, and that he really took it to heart, despite the fact that like it is kind of just a comedy movie in a way. Um, yeah, he does an astounding job. Um, yeah, yeah.
All right, well let's let us talk about some
Trivia.
trivia.
Yeah,
All right. So let's talk about this. So there are three roles that Cage has coveted about playing in his career. Do you know what those roles, the other two roles outside of
of Dracula.
Dracula are?
I would assume they're all horror. I could be wrong,
You are
but I would assume Wolfman, Frankenstein, Monster or Man.
nope.
Dude, I don't know.
So the first one he has already
Or wait, can I have one more guess?
sure.
Sherlock Holmes.
No.
Okay,
So the first one that he has already played on top of Dracula is actually Superman, which he voiced
sure,
for Teen Titans Go to the Movies, which we did an episode on
absolutely,
a couple years ago.
brilliant. Yep.
And his third coveted role that we still would love, we still have the possibility of seeing him in, is Captain Nemo from 2000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Whoa,
Hmm.
that'd be sick. Wow. Yeah, that'd be amazing. I hope he gets it.
So here is, do you want a fact that is weird, or do you want a fact that is, huh, that's cool.
I want them both. Let's start with the huh. That's cool.
So
Fact.
Nicholas-Hoult, who plays Renfield in this movie, him and Nicolas
Yeah.
Cage have both worked together on one other movie. Do you know what movie that was?
I only know him from one other movie, Nicholas Hoult. So no, I don't.
He was 2005's The Weatherman, which I
Oh, okay.
previously covered on here when I was like still trying to find the grooves of a Nicolas Cage podcast. But
Yeah.
Holt has also named Cage as an inspiration for some of his different roles.
Amazing. That's so cool. I this has nothing, well, little to do with this movie. This past week I finished Frasier. Because they're I don't know if everybody knows this, but There will be a 12th season of Frasier that's coming out later this year. Kelsey Grammer's talked about it. I'm very excited. But I finished Frasier this past week, and I was thinking about it. This Frasier is a psychologist in the show and in Cheers and in Wings, and he is so the show has mental health themes. Um, and I found that to be really interesting. This movie has mental health themes. Frasier has also he was the absolute undisputable best part of X-Men 3 as Hank McCoy, the Beast. And Nicholas-Hoult also played Beast in X-Men First Class. I thought that was really kind of fun. Not that Frasier has anything to do with this movie, but anyway,
Well, before I give you my clinical fact, I will also kind of give you this fact about Nicolas Cage since you brought up other people playing it.
sure.
Um, so Nicolas Cage has been involved in a couple of Dracula films that never actually saw the light of day.
Big surprise.
So this is actually something that he's been trying to do for a while. In an interview with Collider, director Chris McKay admitted that the film is actually intended to be a direct sequel to 1931's Dracula. So this is Lugosi's.
Wow.
Yeah. Uh,
That's amazing.
let's get clinical on this one. So there is a rare psychiatric disorder called Renfield's syndrome. It's also known as clinical vampirism. And this is where an individual has an intense fascination with drinking blood or believing themselves to be a vampire, which,
Yeah,
again, Nicolas Cage has done a movie on Vampire's Kiss.
right.
Uh,
Yep.
the
What an awful movie.
the syndrome is named after the character R.M. Renfield from Bram
Yep.
Stoker's novel Dracula, who consumed live insects to obtain their life force.
Yep. Yeah, I was very surprised by how accurate this movie was to some extent. Like it didn't need to be. They didn't need to go that hard. This is a comedy horror movie. But yeah, they maintained some of those little things, and I thought that was really fun. Um, yeah, geez, that's so cool.
I don't know. I
Um,
don't know. Like I feel like allowing it to be that like precise also opened up the door for them to be uh what's like also like bring out some of like the excellent action sequences in this movie because I felt like to
yeah.
me it gave it another completely like different dimension. And I
Yeah.
absolutely love that. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
I loved something you said yesterday. We were talking about this. I'm going to bring up on the podcast. So we mentioned this very in passing earlier, but there's like some both negative and positive ska jokes in the earlier in the first act of the movie. I ska is the reason I'm into music, and music is the reason I have friends. So that just really matters to me a lot, like on a personal level. And ska, kind of like Nicolas Cage, has gotten to be kind of like a meme among people who only kind of know what it is,
Mhm.
kind of among the masses. Whereas like the people who love it, similar to Nicolas Cage, really, really love it. And so I thought it was really, really cool that it was such a feature in the first act of this movie. And Josh was like, he thought it was would have been really cool, really good if they had um, had some ska songs in some of the action sequences. So I'm really curious to see. I'm going to keep an eye on kind of like the soundtrack or soundtracks. If this movie gets any soundtrack releases or things like that, I'd be curious to see if they put any ska songs on it or if there are any ska bands, because there are many, many, many new ska bands that doing very, very well. And I'm curious to see how the ska community like responds to this movie. I think it might be really, really fun. Maybe we'll get some Dracu ska t-shirts or something stupid like that. But yeah, you look like you have something to say.
Dude, I would love that. I told you this yesterday when we were talking because like we basically only talked about ska between like the
Yeah,
screenings of this, and like I thought this movie would have been made so much better had the action sequences been set to ska music.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
I think so too. I think so too. I just loved the treatment of it. Yeah, like I said, Scott's been a meme for a while now. With like uh, what's that show? I think it was referenced on The Good Place. I don't remember. Uh, but Brooklyn Nine-Nine. There's been a lot of like ska references over the years, but there's also been a lot of ska like um stands, I guess you call them, that have really come out over the years, like bigger name people. Martin Freeman um, is one of them. The guy who, oh shoot, what's his name? Weird ginger guy who does Jack Skellington. Um,
oh, Danny Elfman.
Danny Elfman has come out and like really been very vocal about like, yeah, he loves Scott. Was a really early inspiration for him. Um, yeah. But I loved this movie, made it a punchline and also made it like not a punchline. Like they kind of defended it in the same token.
Yeah, with the scene where Aquafina and her partner are like trying to like get the thing, and he's like, what's the graffiti saying? He's like, I think it's just ska lyrics.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And he's like, Scott's not dead. It was so cool. Yeah. So the for those of you who are going to see the movie, have seen the movie, are wondering what we're talking about, there's that scene where there's like it says there's a graffiti says stop messing around. And then on the right side it says, I think there's more of it. It's the song A Message to You, Rudy, by the Specials. Yeah, it's really, really funny and really cool. Um so I do have something. This is not on the ska topic, but given that this is a Universal monster film, it is an official sequel to Bela Lugosi's Dracula, um, which I wonder if that's a record.
So
Like,
I don't know if this is like an official by the studio sequel, but
okay,
this is what the director said that it's intended to be.
okay, I was gonna say like if it's an official sequel, I wonder if that's a record for like most years between a sequel.
It most certainly is.
It
It
would
has
have
to
to be.
be.
It's 90 years.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, my question is, and I know this has kind of been trapped in the rumor death trap of movies such as like, the casting of Superman and stuff like that,
Mm,
were caught there. But the Universal Monster movie universe,
okay.
um, do you think that like this movie could potentially have a place in that if they continue um, that machine?
That's a really interesting question because like that they have been trying to do something with the Universal monsters for years. They tried
Yeah,
it with Tom Cruise and a lot of people hated it.
yeah,
I thought I thought The Mummy was a fun movie, but like
I did too. Yeah, I
um
don't think it had staying power though.
no, absolutely not. And I think that for me, the reason that I liked it as much as I did had nothing to do with Tom Cruise. It had everything to do with Jake Johnson because he was basically Nick freaking Miller in that movie. Um,
True.
and they tried it with the Invisible Man, but like the
Did
invis
they?
yeah, so the Invisible Man they did it with Elizabeth Moss, and what they did with that one is they addressed like uh you know the the lasting impacts of like domestic violence, and it's fascinating. It's a great movie, but I
Mm,
don't think it quite. And then you have this film, so you have like these two well-received films that would um be just I don't really know how else to like how to say it. Like, yes, I think so, but like also at the same time, like I don't feel like they're them trying to do it because it's just they're so vastly different. So I feel like
yeah.
if they're gonna do like a modern day like take on this, I think it'll be like the similar tone because when you go back and you watch everything from the original six films, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula, um, Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Wolfman,
Wolfman.
and like even like Phantom of the Opera, like all of those movies, they feel very similar in tone.
Yeah. 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 I mean that's a good point, but also like I know there have been certain Marvel movies that have gotten a lot of like a lot of praise for being kind of pushing the genre limits
Hmm.
while still maintaining a universe, you know? So I don't know, like I'm not saying you're wrong, but I don't know. I know I would love to see it because I would love to see Nicolas Cage do this character again.
And I'm not saying
Um
that like I don't see it and like don't want it. I just mean
yeah,
like right now, like I
yeah.
I feel like Universal's in this place where they don't know what to do with these characters because
That's Universal as a whole. They don't know what to do at all.
this is the first of two movies that we're getting this year that feature Count Dracula. The next one being The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which it basically takes
Oh yeah, that movie looks terrible.
a single chapter of the first film of the original book and expands it for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Well, interesting. I also know too that like, especially now that he's doing very, very well, gotten a lot of recognition, and stuff like that. I know that Brendan Fraser has just overstated the fact that like he would absolutely come back for a Mummy film. Um, and I think I personally feel that that would be the way to do it. Is to just bring him back. Um, but anyway, just a kind of a fun rabbit hole there.
Yeah. So I got some more trivia facts for you.
Yeah,
So the black and white sequences are actual footage from the Dracula films in the flashbacks, and they basically just with modern day technology took out the actors that were there and inserted Nicholas Hoult and Nicolas Cage.
that's amazing.
Hmm.
Jeez.
All right. So a couple more. You want some rapid fire ones, and then we can kind of get out of here.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So he Nicolas Cage owns several castles, as one does.
Does
Nicholas,
he really?
yes, he
I know he
does.
used to own a haunted house.
He owns several castles. He once
Okay.
lived in a haunted castle for a year to write a horror script, and once he finished, his laptop was broken.
That's kooky.
This is one of the most interesting facts I came across. Nicolas Cage is the fifth Academy Award winner to play Dracula after Morgan Freeman played him in The Electric Company. Jack Palance played him in 1974. Dracula, David Nixon, also 1974, played him in Dracula. Gary Oldman played him in 1992, which Abyss Gazing did an episode on last year, so check that out. But Nicolas Cage is the only one playing Dracula after winning an Oscar, not before.
I'm sorry. Morgan Freeman?
That's what I'm saying. Like that just feels very weird to me. So there is a there maybe just throwing this out there, we can talk about it afterwards. But so in 2000, Nicolas Cage made his producing debut with a movie called Shadow of the Vampire. Have you ever heard of this movie?
I don't think so. I mean, are we going to cover it though?
All right, so let me just tell you the premise of this movie. So this movie tells the story of a the filming of Nosferatu in 1922, but it's hampered by the fact that its star Max Schreck is taking the role of a vampire far more seriously than he should. This stars John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe plays Nosferatu in this movie. Carrie Uways is in this. Eddie
Yules.
Yules. I mean, this like just the three guys. There's three of the like that's it. But this is the also interesting fact
This movie sounds insane.
during the Q&A for this movie, during the AMA for this on the Reddit Ask Me Anything, Nicholas Hoult also revealed that Nicolas Cage was the editor on this movie.
Ooh,
So
interesting.
maybe
We should,
that's a movie we need to cover.
yeah, maybe we'll do it. Maybe we'll do that. So this episode's coming out this month, right? April?
Yes,
Maybe we'll do like a companion episode and release it also this month.
I'm down for that. Yeah, we can make
Cool.
that happen. So
Yeah.
anyways, I think it's all come down to this one singular question: is Renfield worthy of high praise?
Yeah, what have we been doing for now? Yeah, absolutely. I anticipate probably seeing it again in theaters. AMC has done a signature cocktail in honor of the movie that I'd like to try. And I absolutely love this movie. It will definitely be added to my collection, which by the way, I don't own or keep every Nicolas Cage movie. As much as I love him, I just the realistic the idea that I'm gonna watch like Left Behind more than once is silly. But this one will definitely make it in there, and I think this movie is awesome. I think that like they set it up beautifully to have a sequel, but to stand on its own if it needs to. Yeah, I love it. I also just love Ben Schwartz like so very, very much. That he just man, that dude, he's so great.
Yeah, I am absolutely like I think you're 100% right. I think this movie is definitely worthy of all of its praise. I think it's a great film. I think it's funny, it's action packed. I love like how over the top the blood and guts of this movie feel. And like Nicolas Cage is like actually a menacing uh Dracula. Like it's not something we talked about, but like there are
Yeah,
definite scenes where like he got under my skin. I was like, this guy is like creepy AF.
yeah,
And I too will also be adding this into my collection as well. I genuinely love this movie, and I could definitely see this being in my top 10 for the year. Uh, and
yeah.
maybe even top 10 Nicolas Cage performances from what I've seen so
Whoa.
far.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So Nicolas Cage performances, definitely. Nicolas Cage movies, I think I think that's maybe yet to be seen.
sure.
Um, there are movies that I just love very, very much. Like I love Raising Arizona, although it's probably not his best performance or whatever. Like I just adore that movie, you know. And I don't know if this movie will like have the place in my heart that some of the other ones do. But it's absolutely one of his best performances.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So I think that's gonna do it for us on this episode of That's High Praise. But Micah, where can people follow you online?
Honestly, dude, I was thinking about that. I was like, oh no, Josh is gonna ask me where people can find me, and right now they can find me like nowhere. Um, so if you're not too creepy and you want to add me on Snapchat because that's like the only thing I use anymore, it's crustashed. So crust, ACHED. That is my actual Snapchat. Please talk to me about whatever.
Nicolas
I
Cage.
don't know.
That's it.
Nicolas Cage, retro video games, uh, comic books, the bass guitar, ska music more than anything.
In that order. Just start as Scott and go backwards.
That's right.
You guys can find me up on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, and you guys can follow us on our own feed now. That's high praise. So if you guys like this episode, go back and check out our entire catalog and backlog. You guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains, wherever you guys get your podcast from, social medias, or Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we're also on YouTube and Twitch as well. So until next time, remember to keep on caging.
Woo!